Alright, it's time to finally end this, back when everything started on Veldin.
I love a good bookend.
Oh, I mentioned more, as we go on through the level.
One of my favorite twists in video games is when what was the starter level comes back as like the final
You can
level.
tell things are more dire because there's a darker, atmosphere with the skybox. Also, I love the music theme, the cycle music theme for this final portion of the Veldin, because it sounds like two people are playing tennis.
Welcome to the TMNT Red Sky era.
Sure, I guess it's Crank's fault. Um, but
If we get the rendition of the theme tune from that particular era, I wouldn't mind.
basically, the enemies of this final level are the same kind of toads that were in the first level, just if I recall correctly, a bit more, angry looking, because, things are more dire. And elite bug soldiers, the ninjas, this time with the jetpacks. Basically, since it's the final level, they're basically at their toughest. You can potentially ignore some of them, but some combat section will be required. In general, it tests your level of skills, with all your gadgets and weapons. So you better have, come up here with stocking up everything that you can. Especially also because, as you can see, by simply moving, they can also dodge even your rockets. But yeah.
That's something that'll cut these guys out. They can suck up literal rocket power for a few hits.
But yeah, basically, again, this serves as a basically cautionary tales about, war can arrive even at your home step if you're not careful. And going back to, the whole debacle, about Ratchet and Clank Divergence, where the entire debate with that was, that both characters, were more at their own right reason to do it. Well, with this final level, it's pretty much clear that the game is siding with Clank on the argument. The idea that if Ratchet had not focused, too much on his vengeance quest, this might have potentially been prevented, and Veldin would have not even been at risk as it is right now. Meaning that, again, to be a hero is to, sometimes not to be waiting until, the motivation has to be personal. Again, it's part of the whole character arc that Ratchet goes through this game, and, starting with the next game, it's already at a point where the issue doesn't even present itself. But, it's basically there. Also, as you can imagine, despite having similar, level design as the one from the first level, it continued past the point where there was the crater where Ratchet speaks to Clank, and as such, it's much longer. Again, when it comes to final levels, this is actually not super brutal, but it will be exhausting. The checkpoints are technically there, not as frequent as you would want, but not as merciless as you may fear. It's just that, it will actually feel like a... Okay. Jesus Christ. It will feel like it's taking you very long to get there. Again, because of the early installment weirdness of this first game, a lot of the elements are relatively slower and, not dependent on, how much you play the game, but how good you are mastering its controls, even the hacking obviously gets tested with some more, brain teasing of the lasers. I will say this, compared to Spyro, I will say this is a bit of a step up, because if there is one thing that, even replaying it, I noticed, it's relatively consistent with the Spyro trilogy, at least in my opinion, something I noticed personally. When you get to arrive at the last legs of the Spyro games, it definitely feels, at least to me, that the games start losing momentum. Both in Nasty's Lair, then in the winter level of Spyro 2, and then in Midnight Mountain in Spyro 3, technically speaking, the levels that are there are perfectly fine, but you almost feel like you arrive there and you feel a bit exhausted by the whole experience, and as a result, a lot of the levels do not have the same impact as the ones in the rest of the major games they had. With this, at least with this franchise, with Ratchet Clank, I don't get to have the same feeling. Maybe it's because the levels are structured in a more, not linear fashion, but without a hub connecting them. Maybe it's because of that, I don't know. But I definitely felt a difference compared to, you know, the previous franchise that Insomniac worked on. There you go, even your Hydro Displacer actually gets tested here, in terms of actually, there you go. Again, not all of your gadgets are technically tested for this, but a good chunk of them are, which is appreciated.
Would have been nice if they went for like a full-on evil remix of the original tune, kind of like what Crash to Insanity does when you go to Insanity Island.
It's instead, like I said, despite me liking it, it's a completely different theme that Veldin had originally. Again, even the first theme that Veldin had was not particularly bad. That's the general thought process, like I said, when it comes to the scores of this game, at least for this first set of, you know, early games, you know. They're technically not bad, technically also still a step down compared to Stuart Copeland's work on Spyro, but, you know, that's what you had to, you know, work with at the time, unfortunately. Like I said, though, there is still one or two beats that are, you know, fairly iconic enough to be used for stuff like crossovers, like, you know, Metropolis theme. And like I said, I also like this final level theme, technically.
Of course.
There you go, thanks to my mutator I can actually turn the low level enemies, as long as they cooperate, there you go, chickens. Unfortunately, unlike the turkey leg from Medieval, I cannot actually eat them to regain health, but again, what can you do about it? Also, is it just me or the texture of the railing sometimes disappear depending on the distance where I am? Oops. Also, yes, the blood ships are also a bit of a pain in the ass. You would think they would be just there to, you know, dispense more enemies, but no, this one actually shoot at you, so you have to be careful. Again, you're mostly gonna use the rocket launcher in this area, again, unless you haven't been, you know, a good enough boy to grind for the Rhino, which might as well let me also use this. Farming bolts for the Rhino is not too hard. It doesn't require that much when you get down to it, and just a couple of sessions between planets should be enough for you to collect enough bolts, even with the limitations that this first game has. No, it's that one particular trophy added for this specific version of the game, for the PS3 version, if I recall correctly, it asks you to have like 1 million bolts. At least that's far I remember. If that's 1 million, then a lot still. So, and again, even with New Game Plus, normally starting with the second game, the New Game Plus technically has a trick implemented, so it makes you farm vultures faster anyway, so, you know, specifically designed for you to do it. Not this first game, and it was not something that was added in this version. So how do you do it? Well, people discover something bizarre. Basically, in the planet in Aquaria, I think, the planet where you have the overboard racing, by standing in a specific spot and then pushing the inflatable copies of yourself, you know, the weapon that serves as a distraction, you know, by taking advantage of the physics of the game, those technically push you into a wall out of border. And this allows you to reach the hoverboard racing circuit on foot. Now, what does that mean? By standing down a specific slope that we have seen while performing the race, you know, and using the taunter, you will constantly destroy the crates that are on top, which, because of the weird way the coding is actually handled, will also regenerate, you know, constantly. Meaning that by just standing down there, and keeping the circle button, you know, pushed with the taunter. You don't waste any ammo, and you constantly fire bolting. You just technically have to leave it there for a few hours. And that was the best way that people figure out how to farm bolt for this game for such an asinine, you know, kind of trophy. Because otherwise, the rest of the trophy segments, you know, say the requirements for getting the platinum of this game are not particularly that bad. It's just that one sticks out like a sore thumb. There we go. There.
Yeah, click solve this puzzle with all the boinging going on in the background.
Again, thankfully, I'm not under a time limit, or the enemies cannot attack me while I'm performing it.
The time limit is just sanity breaking with all the boinging.
That's tame as far as repetitive sound effects in games go.
Boinging annoys when it's played too long.
Well, again, as you may notice, again, even compared to the other worlds, this level is particularly still going. Again, it's also mostly because there are no alternate branching paths. It's just one linear, you know, gauntlet. Which again, it's the final level, so it is to be expected. It's just that it's still brutal, as you can see. God damn it. And yeah, if they actually notice you even from afar, their shots can actually hit you, so you need to watch out. Again, your missiles, your rocket launcher of the Devastator do have some minor homing properties, but again, the enemies can potentially just hit them just by, you know, awkwardly dodging on the left or on the right. Go. There are also some minor set of covers, but don't rely really on those. Yeah, if I talk correctly, I'm just gonna ignore the ship. There we go. Alright, if I recall correctly, I'm about to actually reach the final stretch. There you go. Yeah, okay, if you really want, you can actually try to get to this section, you know, on your own. But the game basically tells you maybe it's better to go the other way. Maybe there's an alternate route for you to take. Especially because, if you remember, we still have the Hydro Displacer filled with water to be used, so let's use it.
See? That device did come back into play.
Still really don't like the abundance of a blue filter the moment you enter the water.
Well, how else would you be able to tell you're underwater, silly goose?
It's like I'm just basically flashbanged by the Smurfs. Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that! It's a platform. As soon as I get rid of the fucking frogs.
Is it a platform made out of platforms?
Well, I cannot use it as a ramp, but I can use it to have Clank transform into giant form. How convenient that it is here, I guess. To be fair, it's blur technology, so... Which means also I can just, you know... Yeah, I can just Dynasty Warrior now my way through.
It's nice. It's a way for everything you've obtained across the game to come back into play.
And also it's because you have to destroy also these barriers, you know, to progress. But if you have noticed, there is some minor slowdowns in this particular final area, unfortunately.
Hey! What the?
Imbeciles! After all the trouble you've gone through, you're about to die right where you started. It's so poetic.
This is it, Clank. Let's get him.
Alright, the final boss time. First phase is, of course, as Giant Clank. Again, this also premieres, again, the tradition of the final bosses being very, very spongy, especially if you don't know what you're doing.
After all, too bad you chose the wrong side.
You chose.
Oh, god damn it.
Because every conflict has a right side.
Alright, second phase, meaning that you have to catch him up. You will have to do it a couple of times. Thankfully, there's a Gadgetron seller just right here. You know, classic last shop.
I got some great bargains for you today.
It's not every day you get a boss fight where you can literally buy stuff mid-fight, but there you go.
It's because otherwise you would really run out of ammo, especially if you don't have the Gadgetron PDA. Also watch out for the platforms. Somehow they are ruined, I guess. Unfortunately, like I said, again, not only the boss is very spongy, but the attacks tend to be, especially in these cases, they tend to be very unpredictable, you know. You have to really watch out to both the direction the rockets are going and the circles actually that they have on the ground. And the shockwaves require you to do a double jump, otherwise, unfortunately, they hit you regular like that. And as you can see, the Devastator, which is the best technical weapon that I have at disposal right now, is doing very nothing in terms of damage. This truly is the Dark Souls of shooters.
This is the Dark Souls, you'd be dead.
Speaking of which...
I guess you would know from experience.
After forking up enough, you know, to grind enough money, let's get the damn Rhino.
This thing is heavy.
Yeah, try carrying it around in your trench coat for 2 months.
Thank you, sir. We'll be sure to tell everyone about your services.
Listen, you little twerp. If you tell anyone what you saw or what we talked about...
Do I even have to say it?
You two have a nice day.
Pleasure doing business with you.
It doesn't have that many ammos in total, 50, doesn't seem that much. But trust me, they really make it count. Again, Insomniac has a respect for the BFG for this franchise, unlike with Resistance for some reason, you know. And you're about to see, just because the Rhino is literally the game breaker of the entire franchise. Every time it shows up, it's basically your get out of jail free card. Look at this. Just with one type of ammunition and firing a volley that basically makes me burst through the final boss in quick succession. This is why it was important for me to show you, you know, beforehand, just to give you enough context. But yeah, still it's best to move on. Go on, Joe.
You know, the more I look back at the Resistance series, the more it really just feel like Insomniac may have done that while dragging their feet, essentially. I mean, not to say that they didn't do a feasible job, but it really feels like their hearts may not have been completely in it.
Especially also because, if you remember the behind the scenes, their first draft at making the Resistance 1 was completely different, was actually more inspired by Halo, and, you know, was supposed to be about more interplanetary travel, just still in a serious context and involving some time shenanigans, you know, but far different from just, you know, resisting on Earth, you know, in a warlike environment a la Medal of Honor.
You know, you could see it as kind of like, you know, Insomniac's Last of Us to their to Ratchet and Clank being their Jak and Daxter, because Last of Us originally started as a Jak and Daxter game. Now, I only note that because of sort of the similarities, like fighting aliens and whatnot. But yeah, no.
All right, final phase with a twist.
Let's come to this.
Because things weren't just hard enough.
The end of which signals the destruction of your pitiful world.
Alright, Joe, I think you were actually going to ask this kind, or Dweebs, you were going to ask this kind of question a few parts ago.
Who do you think polluted our last world? I did. This is about one thing and one thing only. Cash, and lots of it. You see, I've been paid for every square inch of my new world. Once the inhabitants move in, I will begin
There you
polluting
go.
this world
It's
as
just
well.
because of the
Then
profit.
whole thing starts all
Sure, the
over
Blargs
again.
do need a new home, but if you can actually make a few balls out of it, why not?
Evil little.
Dude literally destroyed his own world just to make a profit.
I'm sure there are many parallels that can be made. Anyway, there you go. This is your extra kick when you have to do it in the final phase. Power slam the jump buttons, because otherwise you have a countdown at the end of which, you know, you die. Because Drek is in that kind of mech, he will be able to get out in time anyway. But still, as you can see, thank God for the Rhino, because, you know, this way I can just, you know, have the fight be much more durable.
When it comes to why this boss is such a sponge, my personal theory is they realized, hey guys, we don't really have many boss fights in here, do we? Oh, it's okay, we'll just make the final boss worthy of
I don't know,
bosses.
the Black Beast at the very least had a decent enough thought process, you know, reasonable amount of HP, and once they are partially depleted, you have to find a way to permanently, you know, deplete those. So, you know, there was a better thought process here, giant sponge.
Well, I'm more so just pointing out the fact that there weren't many bosses, so the
Alright,
mentality may
that
have been
being
make the
said,
final one worth it.
I really like how the fight ends, because first of all, there you go, you don't actually kill Chairman Dracula like that, but you invert the thought process of the laser, and the button is still there. And you know what's the best part about it?
You know, this time I am thinking what you're thinking.
It's not a scripted sequence, it's not a QTE, you don't slowly walk to death in a confined area, the game expects you to perform a regular action like for the rest of the game. God, I miss this.
No, you pressed the wrong button.
And you've doomed us all.
Well, yeah, at the very least killed Chairman Drek.
Clank, no!
In hindsight, knowing in hindsight stuff from the future trilogy, this particular sequence shouldn't have even happened, but, you know, still hilarious.
Clank, you can pull us up now.
The servos in my arm appear to be broken.
Broken? As in,
Well cried.
fall to our deaths broken?
Yes.
Da, 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 da. Oh, great. Well
But he
played.
had just enough jet energy in his body.
Basically.
My arm
But,
appears to be
yeah.
badly
Don't worry, Clank, I'm sure this will be the only time you have to worry about your arm.
Oh yeah.
And meanwhile, there's all that boinging in the background.
Hey, tin can!
You know, Clank, I think this is the start of a beautiful
Where do you
friendship.
think you're going? We, still need to fix that arm.
And to get out of this boinging place is driving me crazy.
I am legit surprised that they left the boinging sound effect on. Like, I get it. It's probably in the map in real time, but come on.
Alright,
dude.
so there will be stuff after the credits. I take the time to showcase the extra stuff, but if anyone wants to start the final thoughts first in the meantime, Waves, what about you?
Okay, the story idea as a whole is fine. You know, two guys from completely different backgrounds, clashing a lot at first, but then become friends later on. And also, there's this guy who's looking to destroy everything because of capitalism, or at the very least, or at the very least, his own warped version of it. Unfortunately, I don't think that really pulled it off that much. Okay, in my opinion, Ratchet is too unlikable, too often for way too long of the story. In my opinion, and by the time he stops being a jerk. It's not even like he gradually realizes it throughout the game. It comes up to me like it's like all of a sudden a switch in his brain just flicked. And it's just, I'm like, oh, okay, so much for development. He just had decided, I'm just going to stop being a dick. Bam, done. If only things are that simple in real life. Like, the other characters are fine, if not, if a bit unremarkable. But then again, this is a start of a series. We've got a whole bunch of other games to get through. The gameplay, well, it looks as bad as early 2000s PS2 as you could get. They basically already did a lot with Spyro, so they just took what they learned from Spyro and built off from that. And this time they could actually have a character that could hold things in his arms, as opposed to Spyro, who really had his fire breath and that was it. Along with the other supporting characters in 3. The music is fine. I mean, it's interesting as well because this is David Bergeron's second Insomniac game because he wasn't there for any of the Spyro stuff.
But he did that other PS1 game that they did, which I haven't played myself. There you go. They actually thank specifically Naughty Dog for helping them with the engine.
That's nice.
The voice acting again. I won't fault Mikey Kelly too much for my issues with Ratchet. He was just performing the character as written and directed, and everyone else is fine. And I know. I mean, hearing the early game verse, it kind of it still makes me.
What happened to Quark?
In your nether regions, causing you undue embarrassment.
Do you just plain stink?
Then you need this, the Gadgetron Personal Hygienator. Hi, I'm Steve McQuark, and this little baby can take care of any grooming needs that are just too much trouble for you to handle yourself. Allow me to demonstrate. Yeah.
He suffered a fate worse than death. Irrelevance.
And corporate sellouts, which might affect your body parts. Ouch.
Well done, Clank. You turned off the game.
I'll ask you to continue the final thoughts at later waves just to showcase a bit things. Similar to Spyro, you get the skill points. The difficulty depends on what you do. You also have cheats, which you can unlock if I recall correctly by earning side skill points mostly. But in this case also let's have some epilogue stuff instead, like a parody of a cover, in this case details, deadly gadgets, obtain ideas, gift ideas for this holiday season. The interstellar noisy news, the fact that Captain Quark was and apparently skilled hooked on nanotech. Okay.
Oh god, and he'll do anything for a few bolts.
I'll do anything for a few bolts.
Ratchet's love interest. Shocking news.
Heavy artillery. Think you can handle the Rhino? Yeah, you can tell they are even kind of structured similar to those video game commercials of the 2000 magazines, or the similar to the one that Kadikers reviewed.
I would not be surprised if some of these actually made their way into actual magazines or comic books.
Popular
like
lumbers.
It's a double the P with popular bumpers.
We'll put a P there then.
Wibs. It's marketing
Prime
101.
Robot of the Year.
An exclusive look at how Clank saved us
Reader
all.
digested an annoyed hater, and now she's Insomniac. What the fuck? First the love tunnel of Spyro 2, and now this.
Oh my!
What is wrong with you? The Royal Guard Times. Rhino salesman pleads not guilty.
Yes, he did get
Novelist
busted.
native claims his brother turned into a chicken.
Battaglia Chronicles. Low Commando wins war, or so he says.
Reinforcements have arrived. What took them so
Over
long?
border. House Kid gets his extra altitude.
The best way to a man's heart is through his rib cage.
Also, free stuff in Comic Sans. Homes and Bunkers, the #1 official guide to the Ombre system, because, you know, without Captain Quark, that has to be sold. So, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Bank seizes Quark Estate, auction begins now, and Ratchet & Clank the motion picture.
Oh.
I'm sure it's gonna be great.
Oh, sure.
Absolutely.
What's
Oh.
that? What's that? We're gonna get the idiot who made the TMNT 2007 movie. Great idea.
Hot bots
Hotbots.
in your area.
The best, holy gears, the best lubrification for your sensitive parts.
You know, believe it or not, this will reach its culmination with Ratchet & Clank 3.
Yeah. I'm now here having some making of video, if I recall correct. Also some commercials, but yes, the staff at Insomniac decided to do some IRL commercial mixing some particular CGI
That
effects.
is Corey. He's helping us with our inflatable decoy test for Ratchet and Clank.
I miss these. I kind of wish, you know, more game development actually had something in their marketing.
Well,
The inflatable decoy, one of 36
I love
weapons
commercials
and
like
gadgets not fit for this
these.
world. Rated T for teen.
Also, I'm pretty sure that video was just zoomed in. I don't know why.
Yeah, I was wondering, what's up with that? Jesus.
Okay, Pete here is going to try
It's like
to
they
hit,
took the clip off of YouTube.
All right,
with
let's
the
see how the
Devastator
Devastator
launch
works.
design for Ratchet and Clank.
Oh shit!
Well, it works.
The Devastator, one of 36 weapons and gadgets not fit
As
for this world.
if I recall correctly, all the dev teams and the devs team at Insomniac will also say later, the core, you know, phrase to talk about this franchise was blowing shit up. So yes.
That is the Morph-Array, and that.
All right, let's see
of course, is
something
Jerry.
less
The Morph-Array
dangerous
is
and a
used
bit
in
more
Ratchet and Clank
practical.
to turn your enemies into chickens.
Less.
Wait, before you do that, just explain to me how it's gonna work.
Oh shit!
Jerry's a chicken. Are you sure we can turn him back, Jerry?
Great.
You turned
Turn one of
into
your
a chicken.
employees into a chicken.
One of 36 weapons and gadgets not fit for
Well,
this
it was in
world.
their contract, under the fine print.
Seriously, I don't know why.
Ratchet and Clank.
Yeah, I don't know why they're zoomed in. No idea.
Weird.
All right, here's instead the making of.
It's assumed in too.
Prepare to be transported to a brilliant sci-fi universe filled with imaginative characters, high-tech weapons and gadgets, and unprecedented
Here also with this you
action-packed
can see
shooting
also
adventures.
early stages
Welcome
of
to
the
brave
HUD,
new
for
world
example.
of Ratchet and
So,
Clank.
Yep.
so it's always interesting to see the early stages of a game still, you know, used in making out to showcase how development went.
When we
Hi,
started
Ted.
talking about the ideas behind Ratchet and Clank, this character that rockets from planet to planet with weapons and gadgets, well, weapons suddenly jump to the foreground. Ratchet lives on a backwater planet out in the edges of the galaxy.
He's a tinkerer, loves to put things together and take them apart to see how they work. Very curious.
He's got this really strong thirst for adventure. And lucky for him, he gets to meet Clank, which allows him to travel to new worlds.
And Ratchet and Clank meet each other, but they don't necessarily get along.
Ratchet just wants to go out and blow stuff up and have a good time, and Clank is much more serious about accomplishing his goals.
The classic
Showcasing
buddy
an
cop.
impressive arsenal of state-of-the-art and radical weapons and gadgets, Ratchet and Clank delivers the future of entertainment here and now.
When you get weapons in this game, there's such immediate gratification. You can go out and blow the crap out of everything.
Basically.
With the gadgets.
Is that the reason this game is rated T for teen? Because they use the word crap in the behind the scenes video?
Well, not just that, remember, there's a lot more edgy humor, and in some cases it's also tied to the title.
Shoots a bolt of electricity out, which actually picks
Not for this
characters up
game
and
technically,
throws them
but
in midair.
for the starting with an X definitely. Oh yeah, I don't think I showcased how the Tesla coil works, because it's also one of the more expensive weapons, but I think I will do in the next game since it returns
And
there.
stand back, fire that thing, and it destroys anything in its way.
I love the Pyrocitor.
AI Hastings?
Pretty sure that's Hal.
I think it's Hal.
It's awfully fun to cruise around the level from the bird's eye view and then target an enemy on the ground and just blow them up.
We were
Still
really
don't like the
surprised how
VZ
quickly
bomb,
Ratchet came
sorry.
together.
Alright, here's how Ratchet came to be, with different designs you can see.
Then kind of a much taller dog-like.
Somebody was a fan of Neopets.
Yeah, it was one of the big fads at the time.
As artists, we've set a really
But
high
where are
standard.
the bushy eyebrows?
Sony even had a live published by themselves Neopets game on the PS2.
Yeah, like Neopets was one of those things that was everywhere until it wasn't.
I think they're still active, it's just in a much more, limited format.
I think the original site might still be active. Although I hope they've updated it, because that thing was archaic.
That is never lacking.
Developed by Insomniac Games, Ratchet & Clank is the
Oh my god, the Windows XP computers of the day.
We knew we had to come up with something.
Again, that's why also these making of videos work great as basically time capsules to see still the mentality, how developers thought to the technology that they possessed at the time. The God of War Greek Saga, making of videos are particularly also insightful of this because for the third game they even had Stan Lee actually make a tour of the office.
Stan Lee?
Yeah, mostly because at least for the first game, if I recall correctly, but I don't remember if it followed Greek Saga, they had a comic book artist doing the concept art and it kind of shows.
By the 5th or 6th level of this game, we are up to the complexity of the strongest titles in the category.
Even the boss health bar was different.
It's a very deep machine.
Just goes to show how much can change during development.
Assembly language, probably more than 100,000 lines compared to what we did on the PS1. More by a factor of 10.
We can have very rich, detailed environments. We can have lots of enemies attacking.
Remember,
you at
folks,
once.
this is what was considered rich and detailed back then, which,
To be
makes
fair,
sense.
again, the jumping from the PS1 to the PS2 was something that was felt, because
Final Fantasy games, you can have voice acting in them.
Well, okay, that's one perk. I'm talking about more fluidity, something that is less chunkily polygonal, less loading times, areas that are technically more big,
We're
that
not
kind of
just
stuff.
creating these environments and expecting them to sit there and expecting people to say, wow, your polygons are so pretty. The point is, it's alive, and there's a lot going on. It's not a static universe, it's an interactive universe, and you interact with it.
This game has a lot of great things: art, technology, design, power from the PlayStation 2, but the best part of it is you get to blow shit up.
Yeah, blow shit up.
With a team of talented designers, programmers.
They already had like 4 discs
Also,
per game.
they had a Grover plushie on top of the monitor, I saw it.
Only for a PlayStation 2.
When I tell people about what I do for a living, that's not work. It's fun.
The Insomniacs don't take themselves too seriously, and people love to come to work and just have a good time, and I think that really is shown in our characters.
Look, plumber's crack.
What did you just say?
I said, look, the plumber's back.
It's nice to know they were as much kids as we were when we played the game.
Helga even had a different color outfit in the early stages.
I never played these games around the turn of the PS2. I was playing other stuff.
With an immense arsenal of
Mainly sport simulators.
innovative gameplay
Huh.
mechanics.
I remember, Jova, that was particular. Again, outside of my country, this I got to learn also trying to like articles read about magazines. In UK, it was particularly the fact at the time, the fact that people were buying a PS2 to look cool by playing FIFA usually.
That makes sense.
What Insomniac has done with this game.
Soccer really practically rules the world over there.
Man, even back then I wasn't really a fan of the raunchy direction those comics, those magazines.
Obviously, no, don't worry, I understand.
But when it comes down to it, it's really just about blowing shit up.
Blow up a lot of shit.
Blow up. Blowing shit up.
Guys, this game's meant for kids. Older kids, but still.
But waves it to appear cool,
Yeah.
Alright.
Besides, we bleeped it out, so it's okay.
Alright, Waves, conclude your final thoughts then.
So I'll continue from where I finished off.
Um,
Yeah, hearing Captain Quark's voice in these early games really does make me sad about what happened with Jim Ward.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, the graphics. Yeah, it looks pretty good for an early days PS2 game. It looks a lot better than Enter the Dragonfly, which came out a day later, or almost.
It's like a mother getting to see her child finally leave the nest and maybe not turn out the way that the parent hoped.
Oh well.
To put it very, very, very nicely.
What about the actual graphical quality, like about Ratchet's potato face?
No, I mean, again, by the standards of games around this time, it all looks perfectly fine to me. I mean, it's not badly lip sync or anything. The faces don't move distractingly so or anything. Although again, I'm just imagining. Okay, in terms of changes that were made in different localizations, I get why they had to cutesy up Crash, for example. In when Crash was shipped over to Japan, even though they couldn't do it in game. But what the hell are with the eyebrows in Ratchet's case?
Most likely to emphasize the with them, kind of what Wrath of Cortex tried to do with Cortex's eyebrows. Good God!
How about this,
Well,
Whips?
the eyebrows that could be characters themselves. But yeah, that's about it. Story, the handling of the story is, in my opinion, not that well done. But the rest of the game, does kind of make up for it. Just like the reimagining. Who'd have thought it? Who'd have thought it? Both games have the same issue, just done differently. But we'll get to the remaster
Eventually.
in about 5 years. Maybe.
Who knows?
All right, that's me done.
Java.
I like it. It's a classic. It's a nice refresher. Okay. I didn't play Ratchet and Clank as much as the other PS2 games because, admittedly, at my heart, I was still a Crash kid, so I stuck with that mainly. Again, I dabbled in stuff like Ratchet and Clank and Sly, but, again, I didn't really stick with them as much as I did with the likes of Crash and Sonic, essentially. That being said, it's definitely among my good memories in that regard here. I just can't say I remember it all the fullest, but it's overall enjoyable. The story may not be perfect, but I feel like it's actually a good one overall. I honestly think that the development between Ratchet and Clank is overall fine. Do I feel like maybe it goes a little too far with the jerk aside? Honestly, not even that really. I feel like, for the most part, it's like they butt heads a bit, but they still get the job done, essentially. And it never feels like we waste too much time on them going at each other. So I am overall fine with that. As for the story itself, it's relatively simple. But I do think it does mark a good era in gaming where game stories still felt like stories adhering to the game as opposed to movie simulators and all that jazz. Kind of like what Quantic Dream tries to go for, which I guess, to be fair, they technically already had with Indigo Prophecy, but it really came to a head with Beyond Two Souls, though. The era where, games started to pride themselves on basically being movies. Look at this immense plot and cinematics, no matter how good or bad the story and gameplay actually are. Yeah. So, I appreciate Ratchet and Clank for being, a good marker from that point where game stories were just that. The stories that provided the flavor needed for games, essentially. Quark's a good enough foil for Ratchet, in a sense showcasing kind of the darker side of Ratchet, showing how somebody who is a little too selfish could end up being. And it's interesting how while Ratchet technically gets his revenge, he doesn't kill Quark, but instead lets Quark live out a life of mediocrity.
He assumes that Quark is dead, and when he inevitably turns up, he's like, yeah, whatever, moving on, you know.
Oh yeah. Like that's my point. It's like, well, I mean, he technically does. I mean, he opts to kill Quark, but even when he sees that Quark is alive, he essentially just lets Quark live out a life of mediocrity.
Especially also
as
because
far as
that
this game
encounter is
knows.
optional, you know. In order to get the Gadgetron PDA, that is not required to finish the game. So there is a good chance that you do not know that, you know, Quark survived until the final cutscene that showcases him having the Gadgetron cleaner commercial.
Regardless, though, I think it's a nice bit. Like, the game doesn't try to act preachy, like, oh, revenge is just bad, and, like, you know, you won't get any satisfaction like a lot of stories do. Like, no, Ratchet technically does get his against Quark, but what he does come to the realization is that by laser focusing on just that, he leaves his planet open to Drek to do his own machinations. And, Drek, in contrast to Quark, absolutely does die. Like, yeah, sorry to anybody who's new to this franchise, but Drek is not the main series antagonist.
I don't even think the Blarg species returns in future games. They might genuinely be extinct.
Like, part of me figures this might have been because Insomniac didn't want to fall into the pit trap of making an obvious sequel hook, essentially.
Even
but
with Spyro,
they
they never had a recurring villain for the first 3 games. It was always one new for the occasion, so...
But yeah, the story, I feel, does its job just fine. The music, I'd say it's good. It's not always memorable, and I do feel like it misses out on some bits, especially like having an evil remix of the first level zone.
Hell, even beyond
Which
that, Joe,
was
like
a
you
shame.
notice, there is no final boss theme. It just keeps using the Veldin, second theme.
Yeah, which, yeah, that's a good segue. Bosses. Again, as we've established, Insomniac do tend to have Arkham boss syndrome, wherein their bosses are either not plentiful, not much, or in some cases just glorified mooks, essentially, which, again, is kind of a shame. I'll admit, I am one who does take into consideration boss fights, and I typically like my boss fights to be fun, engaging, and sometimes even the best set pieces of a game if possible. With Ratchet and Clank, yeah, it's very much half and half. The first boss, good. The fight against Quark, while it's a bit weird, I do feel is fine. On the other hand, there are some of the experiences which, again, like I mentioned, are basically just mook boss rushes, and Drek's is a damage sponge, which I wonder if they made it a damage sponge to make up for the fact that there are very few bosses actually in this game. It's so weird. The graphics, definitely good for the time. In fact, I'd say this is one of the PS2 games that managed to age well enough that I'd say it looks fine even in this day and age. And of course, the humor, which the series is iconic for. I do dig that, and again, the behind-the-scenes stuff showed that Insomniac are not afraid to be hilarious or even a little bit childish, essentially, which is something that seems to have stuck with them for the most part, even to this day, if Rift Apart is anything to go by. I mean, yes, Rift Apart technically has a more serious narrative, but I do feel like we still do get a lot of their snarky and cheeky and adult-oriented humor here and there that has, I would say, survived the test of time. But yeah, that's Ratchet and Clank. It's a time capsule, but one that ends up being timeless. And while it may not be as good as its successors, that's only because this series does the logical thing and improves.
Hey, Draw.
It's a classic, like Jova said. I enjoy the story. Well, much like Jova, I don't. It's not perfect, but I think the overall it works fine enough. Honestly, like I've said, the gameplay is definitely like it works. Like all the foundations are here. Though there's still some refinements to be done. But obviously this is a good start. The weapons are all creative, like it should be. and the visuals look great. And yeah, the music, like, I've never been much of a fan of the Sony platformer style of music personally. I feel like the generic orchestra sounding music that doesn't really focus on memorable melodies like platformers typically do, and instead goes more for the
I
ambient.
still argue that Peter McCullen, starting with the second game, managed to give an identity to the Sly
Mhm.
games.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Like the Sly games are probably the ones that do it the better, if you ask me. But this one, like it's fine, but yeah, not the most memorable. Not really. Yeah, and that's basically it. It's again, it works. It's the original game, and yes, a lot of the core concepts started here, and they're still this apply even in Rift Apart. So yeah, not much more to say. I think I've talked about the story, so I've the worlds are all varied and work well, and the humor's good. I don't think it's comedic genius like a lot of Ratchet and Clank purists out there claim, but it's fun. All right, that's basically it.
All right,
Yeah.
that leaves me. I still enjoy it overall, but it definitely suffers as the first installment weirdness syndrome in a lot of places, particularly the gameplay. So let me start instead with the story, since it's more simple to talk about. It's serviceable for what it wants to do. A relatively typical hero's journey when you get down to it. We just don't know much about Ratchet, mostly because, again, these writers are relatively fresh, and Insomniac did not had a lot of chances for a big, epic in scope type of plot. Not that this is qualified as such, but it's still, you can tell, a step up over the Spyro trilogy on that front, So, it's simple in concept, but a bit rough in execution, I argue. Especially because I think there's a slight miss of timing. We pass from Ratchet, getting his revenge, to later, way too later, the news about Veldin being under attack. I think the story would have been more effective if the news came right before the fight with Quark. Not only that, probably would have been having Ratchet being pissed off and understand, about the request for revenge, should have been put on pause. But also, I think it would have resonated better with the entire, motivation of the game. The whole thing about if you don't do something, if you have the power to do it, it will be eventually too late, and then they will literally come for you. It's as simple as that. That being said, I appreciate the fact that the game doesn't, go for the obvious route in telling that Ratchet's revenge was pointless or he shouldn't have done it. The real problem was not about in doing it. He shouldn't have done it now. He should have waited until he was done with Drek to do it. So again, I appreciate that the game is a bit more reasonable instead of wanting to, whack you with a moral stick and telling you that revenge is bad. Again, the humor is fine. Not the peak of comedy, like Pedro said, but it has its charm. And arguably, these early for the most part, these early titles have aged relatively well. Like I said, there's only maybe one or two jokes in these first 4 games that I think doesn't stick the landing, and especially awkward these days, but we have to wait until Deadlock/Gladiator for that, I think. And like I said, ironically enough, it will be the future trilogy future saga, that will have probably more outdated jokes in it, ironically enough. Again, love TJ Fishman as a writer, but he's not perfect. The music is just there. Some tracks are more memorable than others, but this is a step down from Stuart Copeland, and even if not wanting to recapture that glory from the Spyro games, it's still not particularly a good effort overall. Isolated cases, sure, but in the whole, it's just not working, and it will continue to be like that. Again, it's like Pedro said, it really feels to me that Peter McCollum was the one that had a general idea. That was because he basically had a past history of working with games where music is a very important component, namely LucasArts point-and-click games. So, yes, he had more experience in wanting to, create an atmosphere. And he understood immediately that for Sly, what you need? Jazz, of course.
When you get into Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric, you can tell they were trying to emulate that style, and it's by far the worst example.
Anyway, the voice acting is actually pretty good. Easily the thing that stands out the most out of the whole presentation, As the credits showcase, it's just a very little cast that is doing a lot of the lifting of the voices, particularly Kevin Michael Richardson. But, it works out for the most part, Sure, I still like more James Arnold Taylor as Ratchet, but the guy that they got for this game, actually, Mikey Kelly, is still actually doing a decent enough job, and honestly, it's similar enough to not feel too radical as a transition between voices, so fair enough. Ratchet design is still goofy with the potato face, as I mentioned multiple times, but it is charming enough, and the color palette overall is okay. A couple of the planets are more gloomy than others, but overall the color balance is fine. It will be better in future games anyway. And of course, get now properly onto the gameplay. Despite having still a lot of rust compared to the other games that had a lot of quality, a lot of improvements that eased up more the process of acquiring weapons, and being proficient with them. This one is still perfectly fine, and the creativity displayed with the weapon design showcases the commitment of not wanting to have just a run-of-the-mill shooter, but something that wanted to have an identity properly, because a lot of cartoony shooters of the time, even then, they still have very conventional weapons, and maybe once or twice had something that was fairly different, but not just as creative. Maybe it was just a big rocket with a color palette on it at the end, So this one, instead, trying, to think outside the box when it comes to weapon design, despite maintaining the same core component. Again, it's the one of the printing of the franchise, and I really appreciate it for it. The only other thing that I want to mention that is definitely a negative is the fact that, again, the boss fights, as Jova said, are too few, and the sponginess is already prevalent in this game and is very annoying, Now, as it comes for this actual conversion, it could have been better, definitely. It's not the best port that I've seen. The Slag collection was possibly the more balanced out of the PS2 Trinity, which says a lot. Well, to be fair, again, the only problem that I did found for the Jack and Daxter trilogy was the background changes, as you mentioned, Pedro, but otherwise I did not encounter any particular bug or texture glitches, thankfully, so at the very least it was more stable than these. Anyway, that's pretty much it. So like I said, it's still bogged down, but it's still a good enough starting point for the franchise, even regardless of your opinions on where should I start, should I start from in chronological order, should I skip a first chapter and starting from another. This is still a relatively good starting point for a newbie of a franchise, Anyway, that's kinda it. So, join us eventually next time, where after defeating Chairman Drek, Ratchet and Clank take a kind of vacation until they actually are forced into action into another galaxy far, far away, for the second game, which is called Ratchet and Clank Going Commando. See ya.
Ta-ta.